Entirenet presents the Learning and Development Industry's Thought Leadership Interview Series with your host, yours truly, Mojo Tillett. I'm kind of excited to talk to my friend Steve Howard. We've actually been talking for the last couple hours downtown. What area, what town were we?
Santana Row.
Santana Row. Yeah. It's a pretty cool area. Mm-hmm. And you know, we're geeks, so what do we talk about when we're out hanging out? Work. Work. And engagement. Mm-hmm. One of the things we were talking about is engagement, and you had some interesting things to say about your approaches to engagement in building learning.
Yeah. So one of the things I was talking about was how typically what we do is fairly standard. Oh, look, here's some text, here's some images. It looks like PowerPoint in some flavor or another. And whilst it can get the story across, it doesn't really make for interesting training. It doesn't make for memorable training. It doesn't make for training that people want to return to and take again and do course 3 and course 4. So I was talking about how in a previous job I spent some time looking at engagement while I was there, saying, you know, we should be able to add video and audio and some animations and some storytelling specifically, absolutely put scenarios into the things that we were teaching. And it was quite difficult because that company was working in healthcare, so we couldn't humanize too much of the storytelling that we did, because we couldn't talk about Johnny breaking his leg. We had to talk about a code number broken leg.
Really?
We had to separate people from data. So I had to look at ways to make stories that were separate from that. One of the projects that I worked on was one called FlexLink, and this was a large tool for doing the processing of a healthcare insurance claim. And I was told, you know, can you look at this and see how we can improve this training and make it more interesting? And so I'm like, well, what can I do? Oh, you can do anything you like. So FlexLink, flexible link. Well, a flexible link will be a rope ladder or a rope bridge. And so, of course, you think Indiana Jones.
Right.
Yeah. So I go straight to an adventure map. I think about a pirate map or whatever. And what I found was on iStock Photo, we use that all the time for our images, they have some vector maps. And one was very similar to a treasure map, like a pirate might use. Right. And I was able to take that and tweak it, you know, remove the serpents and things, and move things around a little bit to make it work for what I was working on. It was really a process flow for how do you travel the data through the process to get to a completed claim. And so it was just a typical flowchart. Right. And so the original course was written around a flowchart, which was extremely dry and boring. You know, here's the fourth box. It's the thing where you make the decision, yawn. Right. Well, what I did was I said, well, let's make this a journey on the map. So I literally took the flow chart and overlaid it on the map, tweaked the map so that things lined up correctly for the flow of the process flow, and then changed it. I took the process flow away and drew journey, so little red lines going from, you go from A to B, so that'd be a little town or a village, or actually what it was a castle and a house and whatever. So these were destinations on the map, and you'd follow a journey through, and when you reached a place, there was one point, for instance, where the data, the claim form would be held whilst some processing was done, and the processing was it was sent off to another area, and then it would come back with some more tagging or metadata or whatever. And so I literally had a little jail, so the data would sit in jail for a little while some further processing went on. And so by adding this in, you made a more fun story. So what you ended up doing, you're able to remember the story of the journey as the data traveled through the process, rather than remembering, you know, the fourth box was pink and what was the words in it? I don't remember anymore.
Well, I like that. You know, oftentimes we look at, you know, our body of content and we go, well, this is too boring or dry to add anything exciting to, you know, but I think that it sounds like you took something that's really baseline, just really sterile, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Hospital sterile, no pun intended, right? And you added that adventure to it. And I think that's a key, really, to making a successful training is adding something in there that kind of makes it either adventure for us or creates a hook
Right.
so that we can identify with it or whatever. So I appreciate that.
And then the notion there was gamification. We were heading towards adding gaming elephants. Elephants? Adding...
Elephants would be good.
I had a course I worked on years ago that we called it elephants internally. It was effluent, but we called it elephants. Another one we called hedgehog, whatever. So,
Nice. It's perfect.
Awesome, right. So adding gaming elements as
Yeah.
opposed to making a game out of it. Right?
Yeah.
So but by adding those elements, you make it more memorable and more fun and more interesting. And then I mentioned to you earlier the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. So we're motivating, wow, my words are awesome today. We're motivating people by bringing in some interest and some fun that's separate to the training. Because the
Right.
training can and often is quite dry
Right.
because the stuff that you need to learn isn't football or it isn't Disney or whatever.
Naturally
Right?
Exciting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's going to be dry, but anything you can add into it to make it more interesting is fun. So maybe adding a reward. I was speaking to you earlier about a Microsoft training I saw a long time ago that was about security, and the reward there was when you did something right, that you would see a portion of a soccer match and you'd score a goal. Or if you got it wrong, you would be punished by, there would be a foul against you, or you would lose a goal or whatever.
Right, right.
And so all of these were still motivations, but they were nothing to do with the training as such.
What do you think? I mean, in a way, what I'm getting out of this is you don't necessarily need to make it super complicated either, right?
No.
To be engaging or to make it into a real full-fledged game, but it's that just adding a little bit of game-like feel to it, or something that's gives you a reward, or makes it more interesting to follow through the training.
Right. Have you ever been in anything on the web or anywhere, and you've moved your mouse and you've clicked and you're going, oh wow, that's cool. Look, hey, check this out. When I do this, look, see what happens.
Yeah.
You've been there. So.
It's really simple stuff, but it makes a lot of difference. And one of the challenges we have is we often have more work to do than we have time.
Yeah.
And so for us to be able to take one piece of training and make it into the next Xbox game or whatever is just not possible.
Right.
So just adding that little bit of flavor to something and just bringing it to that next level.
What I discovered from that project, I think there was 6 or 8 modules in total, and it was actually incredibly hard to keep that thread going, that same storytelling going through all of the modules, because you want to differentiate them, but you want to keep the same family resemblance entirely through it.
Right.
So when you watch something like, have you ever done this? Have you ever bought a complete season of your favorite show on DVD?
Guilty. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've gone and you've been watching it for years, and I've got to have this. And you look at the first season, the first show, and you're like, wow, these characters were completely baked in from day one.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah, I did that with Scrubs. I looked at that and I'm like, these characters are absolutely baked in from day one.
There's this consistency.
Totally.
Yeah.
So the storytelling that they've done over 8 years or whatever has never deviated from those characters.
Right.
Now they've developed the characters, but that's
Right.
not the same as them not being solidly baked from day one.
Right.
And one of the things I learned from an author called David Eddings, he writes a series of kind of medieval style fantasy stories.
Yeah.
And you're traveling through the country, a bit of magic and stuff, and big epic tales, like 5 books in the trilogies. And so one of the books that he wrote though was a backstory. So where he started out with was an introduction saying, if you want to have a firm foundation to your story, you must have a backstory. So if you're an actor, what's my motivation? Who am I?
Right.
You have to invent this character and say, well, where did I grow up? I grew up in New Jersey, I did this, I went to school, I did whatever.
Yeah.
My parents were killed by. All of this backstory influences the character and who he's going to be going forward. And he said, well, what he did for all of his series of books was he had that backstory that was commonly referred to. You've done this, you've picked up a book and it's at the end of a battle, and now we're going forward from there.
Yeah.
They never tell you that story other than some hints.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this book was him actually saying, this is the backstory. This is the 500 years before when you first picked up the book, when I started writing them 10 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And that stuck in my head a long time ago as being, that's actually really, really difficult to do.
It is.
So we're instructional designers, or we're instructional developers, or in my case now, a training manager. And for me to say to you, can you write this? You're going to say, I don't have that skill.
Right.
If I went to you, Jeff, individually and said, can you do me a video script, a storyboard for a video? You can probably say yes. But if I go to a typical instructional designer and say, can you do me a video storyboard, they're going to say, oh sure, I can do it. Maybe they'll go away and they'll come back with something that really isn't a great video storyboard.
Right.
Unless they're unusual, they don't have that ability to set the framework right at the beginning, tell the backstory in their heads, and not have it in there, but actually have it very clearly written into the story.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to, even if it's unspoken, even if it's for our own foundation, right, to at least understand that history and that backstory, right, so that we can have that maturity in our story. I think that it might be unspoken. We may not reveal that to our audience, but it does help us kind of build that richness and depth in the story. I think so. I think that's really important.
And then taking that back to the training, which is where we started, to then say, I'm going to build you a suite of training, a series of modules, a series of courses, and we're going to have a thread that runs through. That's a huge task.
Yeah.
It's something I want to do successfully, but up to now I've only kind of scratched the surface on that.
I think that's fun to talk about. I hope you, I want to keep track of what you're doing, and if you achieve that, I'd love to see what you're doing. That's exciting. So I love that, just that, it's like a difference between building a training module and a curriculum. You know what I mean?
Totally.
It's the same kind of, I guess, responsibility we have to kind of step back from that, what we're making, that 4 objectives in that one module, right? To step back and look at, okay, we have this end user, and the goal is this performance, to increase their performance or to have them change this behavior, right?
Yeah.
So we have to, as instructional designers, have that higher level of kind of awareness of that end result. Even when we're building a module, to have them exhibit this one particular small little behavior, to have that awareness of this, this whole.
Where does that slot into the whole picture?
Right.
We were talking earlier about certification.
Yeah.
And this is something that's on my mind a lot, that I need to start and develop a full certification program, and I'm constantly thinking about how do I start at the beginning? What is the first thing that people need to know to be able to get to the next level, to the next level, to the next level? And what are those levels, and what do those levels mean? And if I get to level 5, now I'm certified at level 5, what does that mean in my career? Does that mean I can move to a different company and walk straight into a job that's a grade higher than I'm in?
Right.
And all of these things are considerations with certification, where I don't think that if you're taking certification, if you go and I have my PMI certification, I didn't think about any of those things as I was doing it. I was just, how do I pass the test?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But in terms of putting the certification together, you have to consider all of the things that what it really means. How can you make it recognized and respected through the industry that you're in? And how can you make it have true value? Does it really teach things? Does it instill values? So for instance, PMP instills or talks about ethics as well. So it doesn't just tell you how to be a project manager, it tells you how to be an ethical project manager.
Right.
And it tells you how to be ethical within your work process, which might be slightly different from talking about the ethics of a project manager. So I'll talk about, the ethics of if you're working in Arab countries versus in Asia versus in Europe versus in America. They have different, they may have different ethics from what you're used to in America.
Interesting.
But you're supposed to still work with your American ethics when you go there. So so if you go into the Middle East, and maybe it's common to grease the palm of somebody to get a thing done, but as an American doing business in there, you're not allowed to. It's not ethical.
Right.
So now how do you work?
Right.
So these kind of considerations all got wrapped into a certification. It's like, whoa, somebody
That's
thought about all of these things.
Right.
So there's a huge, what's the word? Tapestry of things that you need to consider in the certification to make it truly valid within the area that you're working in.
Yeah. I think in order to explore that, you need to actually get out of your desk and go to the front lines of the user, right, of the end user, the person that's going to apply that, and really fully understand the scope of what they need to do their job today, and to also be better at their job.
Right.
And I think that's in some ways, that's a business solution. It's a business problem or opportunity. So you look at that opportunity and build around that in a real world situation, and then you've built something of value that if it's certified, then people will recognize it as, this person knows how to handle these business situations.
Right.
So I think, to me, that's what a certification should be. Sometimes it's just a little piece of paper that means you sat in class for 2 days, but I think the valuable ones solve business problems. So,
We've encountered the certified software thing using a particular tool. I don't want to name any, but we've encountered those where if you use that tool day to day, you recognise that it doesn't mean much.
Right.
But if you take it to an employer who wants to know, can you do the job?
Right.
It actually has a value.
Mm.
But the kind of certification that we're talking about is bigger. We're talking about something that affects your career,
Right.
and something that can state not only can you do what you do today, but you're prepared to be able to do what you need to do in 2 or 3 or 5 years' time,
Yeah.
or you're on the road towards that.
Yeah.
And that's a bigger, scarier picture that keeps me interested.
Yeah, it's big picture stuff. It's fun to think about, and at the same time, if you can make that connection to the story, the engagement part, if you can kind of tie that end result to the engaging somebody all the way through that certification, I think you really have an effective, useful, and enjoyable program to go through.
You've probably come across that. I forget. I get names mixed up. Johnny Appleseed comes into my head, but I wonder if it's wrong. Microsoft in particular have had training for Microsoft Office over the years where they'll use one company and talk about it when they're looking about spreadsheet training and about database training and about Microsoft Publisher, how to build business cards.
Yeah.
So all of this will be the same company. We'll call it Microsoft.com for easiness, right? So all of them, you're building business cards for Microsoft, you're doing spreadsheets for Microsoft, you're doing word processing for Microsoft. And it's the same company all the way through. And so you have the same threads, so you have the same events being discussed. And so instead of having to paint a new picture every time, you're just adding a new character into the picture and building a larger tapestry. I'll use that word again. So I'm thinking about that in not only just in my training, but also in the certification. How can I have solid threads that save me repeating the same information? Yeah. And I'll talk a little bit about where I work because it'll help explain my thinking. We work in network security, so we're guarding against advanced malware attacks where people are targeting you as an individual or your company specifically to try and break in and get your data or get access to your customers who also have data. And so what we're doing is guarding against specific types of threats, like a phishing email or a drive-by when you visit a website. And we're guarding against then specific things that they will do on your network. So we want to prevent malware traversing across the network and infecting multiple machines to get to the machine with the information. So there's a bunch of things that we're doing, and we use a bunch of different tools to do it. But if we can talk about one company and one infection across the whole suite of tools that we have, then we have a thread that makes sense.
Right.
So there's some well-known malware, one's called Poison Ivy, and if you get that on your system, it might have been tweaked by somebody somewhere who's tweaked it to suit your network. So maybe they know that you're using Windows 7, maybe they know that you're using a certain type of Apache server or whatever, random thoughts. Right. But once they understand exactly what's there, they can craft precisely the right piece of malware to install onto your system to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
And having done that, then what would that look like? So if it was our network protection, it would look like a particular thing. If it was, we have a thing that looks at packet capture. It actually captures all of the network packets as they come into your network and all that go out.
Wow.
So I can say, oh, I've discovered an infection today. Let's see when it happened. And look back and say, oh, look, well, now I know it's Poison Ivy. That was the alert I just got. But I can see that Friday, 3 weeks ago, was when it came in. Wow. And it's infected, blah, 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 right? Yeah. Now, if I can use my training to talk about that same one infection and show you how it looks across 20 products that we have, right, and talk about it through all of our training in the same way, I don't have to paint the picture every time.
It's
I don't have to write a new story.
You build that story, that backstory. And
right.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think, again, it's that big picture thinking and being able to make those connections across your curriculum. Right. And I think that consistency helps the end user onboard quickly to that particular training. There's assumptions that can be made. We already understand this environment we're in, and so they can go directly onto the particular objectives of this training and get past all that stuff really quickly.
Yeah.
So. Nice.
Just one last thought there. That I find that is requiring a different kind of person looking at building the training. So in the software world, you talk about a software developer, but then you also have a software architect. Right. And the architect designs the full solution and then gets other people to build it. Right. And I'm thinking that now I'm looking at having a training architect
Nice.
I'm not going to call
Yeah.
somebody that, but that might be the role that's in place
Right,
to
yeah.
re-architect the full thing,
Yeah.
to understand the full solution before we can start to build
Yeah.
the bits and keep them all relevant to each other.
Yeah, I think that's important. And now you and I've been talking about this today. You're in a situation now where you're building up training teams, and you're having to look at all the little pieces that make up good training, all these little skills, and how to build that correct team to be able to answer all that. So that's exciting, man. That's really cool. So I appreciate you sharing all this with us, and looking forward to kind of reconnecting and down the road and seeing how it's working.
Yeah, I'll be interested to show you some successes and some failures.
Nice.
Maybe
I'm
too,
sure
see how
there'll
it
be
goes.
more successes than
Yeah.
failures, man.
It's
Thank
cool.
you.
Thank
All right.
you.